My name is Laurel. I was an unexpected arrival, a fact my mother relayed with the casual air of a weather report. Oh, she was a surprise, she'd tell anyone who asked, offering an easy shrug and a smile. Sometimes, forgetting my presence, she'd add, we hadn't planned a thing. After Selena, we thought our family was complete. Then she'd trail off, as if that statement required no further thought. By the time I was born, my sister Selena was already 10, the established star of our household. Her life was a calendar of piano recitals, soccer tournaments, and science fairs. Evidence of her reign was everywhere: framed photos on the mantel, snapshots on the fridge, her beaming face dangling from the Christmas tree branches. I was absent from that gallery. I only entered the family pictorial record when I started holding the camera myself. No one ever said, "We don't love you." The words were unnecessary. Indifference has a sharper, quieter voice. I learned its language early: to be still, to make no repeated requests. My needs were met on a basic level. I was fed, ushered to school, but warmth and true attention were foreign currencies in our home. They were only minted at my grandparents' house. Each weekday morning, after a wordless breakfast, my father would jingle his keys. "Is she ready?" "Yes," my mother would murmur into her coffee cup. And off we'd go to their little yellow house. It was a world that smelled of cinnamon and yeast, where lace curtains danced in the breeze. "There's our little joy," my grandmother would whisper, pulling me into a hug that felt like shelter. My grandfather called me my girl, and his lessons, counting coins, tying sailors' knots, felt like sacred rites. In that house, I was anticipated. I was valued. They were the ones clapping loudest in the auditorium, the proud audience of one when I stumbled through a poem. "You were wonderful," my grandfather would say, and in his eyes, I believed it was true. When Selena left for college, my parents didn't shed tears. They threw a celebration. Cupcakes, a congratulatory banner, a slideshow of her achievements. "You did it." My father raised a glass in a toast. "She's destined for remarkable things." I stood by the wall, balancing a stack of dirty plates, and wondered if they would ever look at me with that kind of seeing. The change began the next morning, announced by a slip of paper on the refrigerator. A list: wash dishes, do laundry, vacuum, cook dinner. It bore no signature, but its meaning was clear. That evening, my mother made it explicit. "Now that you're the only one here," she said, "you'll need to help out more." That "more" quickly expanded to mean everything. I mastered the sorting of laundry, the scouring of pans, the precise chop of vegetables. Gratitude was scarce. My existence was primarily acknowledged in the negative, a chore left undone. "You live under this roof," my father would remind me. "That means you contribute." Selena, they recalled, always helped. But her help seemed lighter, never a burden. She received a weekly allowance for emptying the dishwasher. I maintained the entire household, and my labor dissolved into the background, utterly unseen. In the beginning, I didn't know how to ask for anything. When you're treated as scenery, you learn not to speak. But a slow shift occurred. I began staying up late, not for cleaning, but to haunt college websites on the family's aging laptop. Oregon State, UC Davis, even New York University. I knew better than to nurture real hope, so I read admissions blogs like fairy tales, stories of other people's futures. I studied dorm room layouts, imagined my name on a mailbox. It wasn't about anticipating letters, it was about the sheer ownership of it. My name, my key, my space. I stopped waiting for an acknowledgement of my struggle. I simply divided my life into two compartments: the necessary drudgery of the present and the secret, stolen planning for a future. I would scrub a toilet, then click to a scholarship page. I'd calculate my GPA in the glow of the screen, whispering my dreams into the silent, sleeping house. That quiet yearning became my sole rebellion, the only dream I permitted myself to hold. The acceptance letters arrived in a trio, a miraculous convergence within a single week. Each one felt like a first, deep breath after being submerged for years, proof that someone, somewhere, had looked past the quiet and seen value. I arranged them carefully on the dinner table, a fan of official envelopes against the worn wood. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs. My mother's eyes never left her plate. "That's nice," she said, her tone flat as she passed the salt shaker to my father. I assumed they simply hadn't grasped the magnitude. "I got into all three," I said, my voice firmer, trying to pierce the domestic fog. "Keep it down," my father muttered around a mouthful of food. He swallowed with effort, his sigh carrying the weight of a great inconvenience. "We can't pay for any of them." The statement hung in the air, so absurd I almost laughed. A joke in poor taste. But then my mother set her fork down with a definitive clink. "We spent almost everything on Selena's wedding," she clarified, as if explaining a simple budget deficit. "We even took out a loan for the reception." The comparison rose in my throat, bitter and unavoidable. "But you paid for her college." "That was different." Her reply was swift, a practiced blade. "We saw potential in her." The words didn't just land, they detonated. Every muscle in my body locked. The familiar silence of the dining room thickened, but this time it wasn't just empty, it was cruel. I felt a fundamental cable inside me snap. "You need to get a job," my father continued, his voice adopting the cadence of tough love. "Save up. Take out loans. That's what adults do." I stood up. No more words. My hands trembled violently as I pushed my chair back. The climb to my room felt endless. Behind a closed door, the dam broke. I fumbled for my phone, my vision blurred, and dialed the only number that meant sanctuary. My grandmother answered on the second ring. "Sweetheart." Her voice was an instant bomb. "What's wrong?" I tried to form a sentence, but all that escaped was a raw, choking sound, the audible form of my breaking point. 15 minutes later, I stood on their familiar porch. The door swung open before my knuckles could meet the wood. Grandpa stood there, and without a word, they folded me into a shared embrace. It was the embrace of people who had been standing watch, who had known, somehow, that I would need catching. Sobbing, I poured out the story, the letters, the table, the casual demolition of my future. Grandpa's kind eyes clouded over, turning stormy. Grandma fell utterly still, her lips compressing into a pale, severe line. With each detail, she seemed to solidify, transforming from softness into something unyielding. Without a word, Grandpa disappeared into his study. He returned moments later, a weathered brown folder in his hands. He placed it gently in mine. "We've been saving for your education since the day you were born," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Inside, bank statements told a story of quiet, steadfast faith. The balance was enough. "For any of the 3 schools. Choose," he whispered. "We'll figure out the rest." That was the pivot. The shift in the axis of my world. 2 weeks later, I moved into the little yellow house. My mother did not offer to help pack. My father asked no questions about my destination. Selena did not call. I departed from my childhood home, leaving a spotless room behind, a final, perfect chore. The silence I left was profound, a tangible entity louder than any farewell. At my grandparents', I was given a real desk and a door that locked. Each morning began with a warm breakfast and a warmer smile. They transformed the daunting bureaucracy of financial aid into a manageable project, drove me to campus as if it were a pilgrimage. The day classes began, as I stepped out of their old sedan, Grandpa leaned over and pressed a kiss to my crown. "Go make us proud," he said. I nodded. I already knew I would. The mandate wasn't a burden. It was the foundation I'd been missing my whole life. I chose finance. My motivation was not a love of markets, but a need to decipher a code. Money was the quiet engine of power and choice in my family, a force that had validated my sister and invalidated me. I wanted to master its logic, how to earn it, safeguard it, and make it grow. The language of numbers was brutally transparent. It didn't offer hollow praise or withhold affection. A sum was a sum. A return was a return. It was honest in a way people had never been. The work was demanding, but it felt like building a shelter, brick by brick. I lived in the library, my nights stretching into early mornings. I asked professors questions that made them pause and reconsider, not because I was trying to impress, but because I truly wanted to understand. For the first time in my life, I was being seen, not as a pair of useful hands, but as a mind. My thoughts had currency. Back in the world I'd left, a slow, silent estrangement solidified. My parents did not call. I did not visit. The distance between us, once an emotional chasm, became a geographical and factual one. I grew accustomed to the quiet on that end of the line. It was easier than the noise of their indifference. Meanwhile, the gilded narrative of my sister's life began to tarnish. In gentle, worried tones, Grandma would share updates during our phone calls. Selena had been laid off. Ethan had left another job. The fairy tale wedding had led to a decidedly unmagical reality. They're struggling, Grandma would sigh. They never learned to plan for a rainy day. I listened, a silent witness. I had no counsel for someone whose entire life had been a smooth, paved road now suddenly cracking beneath her feet. My own path had been all jagged rock and uphill climb. I didn't know the way from here. During my second year, an internship at a small, scrappy financial firm became my proving ground. My supervisor, Abigail, was a bolt of energetic intelligence. One afternoon, she pulled me into a vacant conference room. "You have a real talent for this," she said, her gaze direct and unflinching. "Don't let anyone waste it." I wrote the sentence verbatim in my journal, the same battered backpack from high school still at my feet. It stains a ghost of my old life. But the past has a long reach. It found me on a random Tuesday in late October, in the middle of midterm exams. The call came, and the bustling world of campus, students rushing, buses sighing, life moving, did not stop. It simply ceased to matter. I sank to the floor in the fluorescent-lit hallway, the phone pressed to my ear, trying and failing to draw breath into a sudden, brutal vacuum. My grandfather was gone. I went home to help Grandma with the terrible, practical rituals of death. Her hands, always so steady, shook as she poured tea. She would set 2 cups on the table, then stare at the second one, lost in a fresh wave of realization. We moved through the days in a haze of quiet endurance. Then, one gray afternoon, she looked at me, her eyes clear and deep with pain. "He always believed in you," she said. A pause. "So do I." Her belief became my anchor, but the mooring was tragically short-lived. 7 weeks later, I lost her too. This grief was a different, deeper fracture. It wasn't just the loneliness of being orphaned twice, it was the loss of my true north, the first and only source of unconditional love I'd ever known. After the memorial, the family gathered in her orderly study for the will. I expected dry legalities, the straightforward distribution of trinkets and accounts. What followed was a quiet, seismic shock. The lawyer's voice was calm. "To our granddaughter, Laurel, we leave the house at 319 Astor Lane and the sum of $150,000. A physical jolt went through the room. My parents turned to statues. Selena's face crumpled in confusion. The lawyer continued. "To our daughter, Miriam, and her husband, Patrick, you received $200,000 when you asked for it. This is our final decision." Color flooded my mother's cheeks, a crimson tide of shock and what might have been shame. My father's eyes fixed on a point on the far wall, refusing to find mine. In their stunned silence, my grandparents' last message was heard loud and clear. They had seen everything, and they had chosen. The silence in my grandparents' kitchen that night was a living thing. I sat at the familiar table, my gaze tracing the patterns on the linoleum where we'd once spread out board games, his laugh rumbling, her hands deftly moving pieces. One thought echoed, relentless and cold. They asked for it. They asked for the very thing I was denied. It was for a down payment. The voice, gentle and aged, came from the doorway. Mr. Delaney, their longtime friend and advisor, stood there, his expression softened by sympathy. "For Selena and Ethan. They came just after your grandfather passed. Your grandmother, she was deeply troubled by it. She told me she wished they'd had the decency to wait, or that she'd had the strength to just say no." He gave a small, sad shake of his head before retreating, leaving me with the truth. My fingers brushed over the cool surface of the deed. This house, this sanctuary, their entire legacy, was now a testament. It was divided not equally, but justly. To me, the one they had chosen to believe in, and to them, who had only remembered their parents when they needed a financial solution. I didn't cry. The grief had been spent. Now, I just held the physical weight of their faith, the cold metal keys in one palm, the profound, anchoring responsibility in the other. The years that followed were built on that foundation. I worked with a focused intensity, climbing in my career, not toward opulence, but toward an unshakable security. I sought the stability they would have respected. At 26, I owned my first apartment. At 27, my emergency fund was robust. By 28, my independence was absolute, a fortress I had built myself. My parents and I settled into a distant, polite rhythm, sterile holiday texts, the occasional obligatory visit. The house of my childhood was decaying under the weight of my sister's faltering life. Selena and Ethan, with their 2 kids, had boomeranged back after another failure. The structure itself seemed to sag in resignation. Paint curled like dead leaves, gutters drooped, the air inside thick with the strain of too many lives in limbo. During one strained dinner, I watched my father lower himself gingerly into a chair, his hand massaging a complaining knee. I saw my mother flinch as she lifted a squirming grandchild. A quiet clarity settled over me. "You need a proper home," I said, my voice cutting through the clutter. "Single level, safe, manageable." They stared, uncomprehending. "I've saved. I want to buy it for you." There was no refusal. Instead, there were tears, real, shocking tears. My mother clutched my hand, whispering, "You're too good to us." My father pulled me into a stiff, unexpected embrace. For a fleeting moment, the ghost of a different family flickered between us. The search felt almost normal. We found a pleasant, single-story house with an accessible layout, a calm street, and a patch of earth for my mother's beloved roses. I transferred the funds in full, a clean, unburdened transaction. The paperwork was prepared, the title transfer awaiting only my signature at the lawyer's office. But as I held the pen, I paused. A final, small thread of caution held me back. I would sign, I decided, after the housewarming party they were so eagerly planning. A celebration to mark a new beginning. They were effusive. "We'll take care of everything," my mother promised, her eyes bright. "You've done more than enough already." I wanted, desperately, to believe in that version of reality. But the weeks bled into one another with no date, no invitation. My calls were met with vague murmurs about perfection and picking the ideal day. The truth arrived not with a call, but with a cheerful notification. Selena's Facebook post glowed on my screen. "New beginnings. Come celebrate Mom and Dad's housewarming this Saturday." Smiley face emoji beneath it. Her children grinned in front of a vibrant balloon arch. I simply stared. The words pixelated slightly as my vision blurred. The message was impeccably clear. I was not on the guest list for my own gift. I drove to their new neighborhood and parked a block away, an uninvited spectator. From the corner, the scene was already in full swing, jazz spilling from open windows, the festive clatter of glasses, waves of easy laughter. Cars choked the driveway. A bouquet of balloons, tied to the porch railing, bobbed in the breeze. In the distance, I saw my mother, her face lit with a hostess's smile, waving to a guest bearing a casserole dish. They had planned this for weeks. I walked toward the noise, a ghost among the living. I recognized aunts, uncles, neighbors, the same faces that had looked through me as a child while I scrubbed the front steps. Their gazes slid over me now, not with indifference, but with simple non-recognition. I was not part of the event. The front door was open. I stepped inside. The sound of my father's voice, buoyant and proud, carried from the living room. "Been through our share of storms, but we've landed safe. Our forever home." A ripple of warm applause followed. My mother's voice added, sweetly, "And we couldn't have done it without Selena's help with the down payment. She's always so thoughtful." My father chimed in, "She truly looks out for us." Not like, well, some people get so wrapped up in their own worlds. I moved into the doorway. "It appears this house belongs to some people," I said, my voice clear and steady. The room pivoted toward me. The music from a speaker seemed to dip. My parents froze, paper plates suspended in their hands. "Laurel," my mother breathed, the color draining from her face. "We didn't expect." You didn't invite me, I stated. I came to the party for the house I purchased. The house that is still legally in my name. My father's expression hardened into a mask of strained authority. This is neither the time nor the place for this discussion. I believe it's the exact time and place, I replied calmly. I drew the leather folder from my bag and opened it with deliberate slowness, holding the documents aloft for the room to see. This house is not yours. You never signed a deed. You have been telling everyone a story that is not true. We thought you would just give it to us, my mother whispered, her voice fraying at the edges. I wanted to, I said, the weight of that truth anchoring me. But you erased me. Again. A hushed current of shock moved through the crowd. Selena went ashen. Her husband, Ethan, studied his shoes. One of her little boys, clutching a balloon string, piped up, "Mommy, why is Aunt Laurel mad?" I addressed the assembled guests. The celebration is over. This property does not belong to them. It never has. A profound silence descended. I stood at its center, the paperwork in my hand held up like a truth mirror. They stared into the reflection of their complicity and could not turn away. The festive masks fell from my parents' faces, leaving behind something hollow and stunned. Selena's mouth opened, but no sound emerged. You told everyone this was your house? I asked my father directly. You plan to live here with Selena and her family? You constructed a lie, right here in the home I provided. My mother's plea was barely audible. We're your parents. We thought after everything, you'd let us have it. I intended to, I answered, my gaze steady. At the housewarming you couldn't be bothered to invite me to. We needed security, my father burst out, hands spreading in a gesture of helpless justification. We sold the old place. We thought it was understood. It was understood, I nodded. Until you made it perfectly clear I wasn't even worthy of an invitation to my own understood gift. The room grew restless. A guest reached for her handbag. A couple edged toward the foyer. The uncomfortable truth now hung among them, as palpable as the scent of party food. You're cruel, Selena spat, drawing her children protectively against her legs. Think of the children. Yes, I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper meant only for her. I sincerely hope they never learn to treat family the way you have all treated me. I did not raise my voice. I did not create a spectacle. I simply turned, walked to the front door, and held it wide open. They left. One by one, family by family, in a shuffling, silent procession of coats and Tupperware and averted eyes. My parents, Selena, Ethan, the whole gathered audience of our shared history. No one protested. No one offered an apology. They simply collected their things and departed, steeped in a shamed and wordless retreat, leaving the echo of their empty party behind. I stood in the open doorway long after the last taillights vanished around the corner. The evening air was cool, a clean contrast to the stuffy warmth of the betrayed party inside. The silence that filled the house was absolute, not the lonely silence of my childhood, but a profound and peaceful quiet that belonged solely to me. It was the sound of a chapter slamming shut. The bombardment of communication began almost immediately. The phone rang with calls from my mother, then Selena, then Ethan. I let each one go to voicemail. The messages evolved through predictable stages. First, shocked persistence. Call me back, we need to talk. Then wounded pleading. How could you do this to family? Then blistering anger. You selfish, spiteful. Before finally subsiding into a wounded, empty silence. I blocked every number, filtered every email. I recognized the script, the manufactured crisis, the guilt trip disguised as care. I refused to re-enter the narrative they had written for me, where my role was that of a silent benefactor or a useful ghost. Through the reluctant grapevine, I later learned they'd moved into a cramped 2-bedroom apartment. Selena's boys shared a bunk bed in one room, my parents squeezed into the other. The home they'd sold was gone, and the dream home I'd offered was gone too. Their plans, built on my silent compliance, had dissolved. A few days later, I walked through the quiet, empty house on Astor Lane one final time. I let my hand rest on the kitchen counter where my grandmother had rolled pie dough, on the arm of my grandfather's reading chair. I stood in the spots where I had felt seen and cherished and real. Then, with a calm resolve, I called a realtor. The sale was swift. On the day of the closing, I opened a filing cabinet in my own apartment and slid the deed into a fresh folder. I labeled it simply closed. The finality of it was not harsh, it was correct. The money from the sale became a tool, not a trophy. I invested a portion, secured another, and placed the remainder into an account I named Legacy. It was not the legacy of obligation or resentment, but my own. The physical house was gone, and with it, I released the immense psychic weight I had been carrying, their unspoken demands, their endless justifications, their conditional expectations. What remained was space. Mental space, emotional space, a life that required no external permission to simply be. I found a small cottage on the city's edge. It was unassuming, filled with light, and undeniably mine. In a favored corner, a window catches the morning sun at a perfect, golden angle. A comfortable chair waits there, a soft blanket draped over its back. That is where I sit with my tea, where I read, and where I think of them, not the family I was born to, but the family that chose me. Their photograph rests on my mantel in a frame of dark wood. They are caught in a moment of shared happiness, her eyes crinkled with a smile, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. I don't cry when I see it anymore. I smile. Their wisdom is woven into my daily life, in my financial prudence, in my intent to listen before speaking, in my understanding that true love is not proclaimed, but demonstrated through steadfastness. This understanding will shape my future. If I ever have children, they will live in the certainty of that love. They will never have to audition for affection or negotiate for attention. They will know, from their first breath, that they were wanted, cherished, and believed in without condition, without caveat. Last week, I turned the earth in my small garden bed and planted lavender for my grandmother. This morning, I watered the young shoots, the grass cool under my bare feet, the spray from the hose catching the light. The sun warmed my face and a deep, settled peace filled me. It was the peace of an ending that is also a clean beginning. The cycle of neglect and emotional transaction, passed down like a faulty heirloom, stopped with me. I broke it.